Well, first off, I'm Donnie Benjamin. I'm a co-founder of Sobol. I know this is a very clickbaity title called "The U.S. Army is More Sobol Than Google." Hopefully by the end of this, it will make a lot of sense. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll also understand a little bit more of what it's actually like to be in the U.S. Army as opposed to the movie versions. When we think of Sobol, we think of the future of work. And to us, the future of work doesn't mean you wear jeans to the office or you use Slack to communicate or even that you'd work remotely. It's a much different way of thinking about approaching work and working together in teams. And I will save some time for some questions. Okay, so I think it's important when someone's trying to tell you a little bit about their life, you can have some facts about them to understand the lens with which they're approaching the world. So I thought I'd throw in some 5 facts about myself. The first one, and I think it's very important, is that my Uber rating is 4.97. It might be 4.98 now, and N is very high. And I think this is important to know because when I talk about things with a maybe critical eye, I think I treat people with respect, both themselves, their property, and strangers in a car. So hopefully that's a good metric, I think, for someone's kindness rating. Second piece, I was an active duty U.S. Army officer for 5 years. And before that, I spent 4 years in college at the military academy. So 9 years of my adult life in the military. Third point, I was an MBA intern at Google, which is a big company that's headquartered in Mountain View, California. They do a lot of things with the internet. Fourth, neither of my parents were in business, and I grew up in the Southwest. So bullet points 2, 3, and 4 are saying when I got out of the Army, everything I thought I knew about business was just some mental model that I came up with in my head. There was no, this is how a business has to work or has to run. That came much later. And then 5, engineering and undergrad. Hopefully that gives me some nerd cred and also maybe means I can solve problems thoughtfully. So those 5 facts about myself, I will apply them. Like I said, between 2, 3, and 4, when I went to business school and I did an MBA internship at Google, it was my first like non-nanny sort of civilian job. And I would say this was my face, which is also my favorite emoji. There was some anger, there were some tears. There was, of course, smiles because when you're getting free-range egg sandwich every day, freshly prepared to you for free, and then you get a massage, like that's a perk. That's a nice. That brings some smiles. But overall, this was my face. And so I think there are a few reasons, and I'm going to go into 4 vignettes that hopefully illustrate a little more my confusion around this idea of corporatism. But I think the first is, there's that expression about, disappointments, the difference between reality and expectations. And I definitely think the way Google brands themselves as a place to work is very different than the reality. So there's that, and of course that's, I think, in a lot of places. But also I just, if you have a traditional corporation and you give people free food and massages, it's still a traditional corporation. So I'm going to illustrate 4 vignettes, talk about how we're rethinking work, and also the tool we use and we're building, and some references. So my first vignette I call the Happy Birthday Infinite Loop. And I'm sure this doesn't just happen at Google, but essentially someone somehow would know it was your birthday or your Googleversary, and in the morning they would send out an email and it would be like, oh, happy birthday, Alex. And then someone would reply all to the thread and they'd be like, yeah, Alex, happy birthday. And then someone would reply all again and say, happy birthday, but they'd use 3 exclamation points. And then someone would reply all with a GIF. And when I watched this unfold, I was just very confused at first why adult Homo sapiens at Google, nonetheless, would behave in such a strange way. Like, you have to get the word in that you're saying happy birthday. And I talked to my mentor, who was also an Army veteran, and he said something around the words of, just play the game, man. That's how the corporate game at Google is played, and I thought this was very confusing. I didn't understand. And one day, I got an email. It was a guy named Sam's birthday. Sam sat behind me, and Sam and I were actually chummy. So I did this thing where I stood up, I went over to him, I put my hand on his shoulder, and I said, "Happy birthday, man." And he said, "Thanks, man." And then I went and sat down. And later in the day, my mentor came over and he said, "Donnie, we talked about this. I didn't see you reply all to the 20 emails." And I said, "Well, I said happy birthday in person." And his response was, "It doesn't count if you say it in person." So I'm very confused at this point what it means to actually be googly, why you would remove the humanism out of wishing someone a happy birthday and make it just a completely corporate, non-humanistic thing. And my other favorite part of this was when people would reply all to the threads, then they would turn to somebody else and say, "I hate getting all these emails. I just want to hit inbox zero." So that was also very confusing. So this idea of corporatism started to emerge, and maybe this idea of what it means to be googly or work in a fun place was not what it seemed. Okay, so vignette number 2, and don't worry, the first vignette was the longest, but vignette number 2 is this idea that everybody is the same and everything is always awesome. No matter what you're presenting, it went well, it's good, it's great. But there was this other thing where the recruiters used to say it, and my manager would say to me, just go talk to a Googler. They'll help you out. And I wanted to be like, what do you mean? Any of the 50,000? I don't understand what you mean when you can say, go talk to any of them. And I promised I was going to explain how the U.S. Army is more Sobol than Google. The U.S. Army actually has a great expression, and it's that the Army has all kinds. And I think there's this idea that everybody is a soldier and everybody's the same, and that couldn't possibly be farther from the truth. In fact, a lot of the training you get as a junior officer is understanding how different people are led and how to earn respect and earn trust, and what works for somebody, one person, is not going to work for somebody else, and to treat people as individual humans. And everybody says the expression because it's soldiers come from such a diverse background of experiences, genders, ethnicities, nationality, you name it. It's all in the Army. You see a true representative sample of the United States in the U.S. Army. So nobody would ever say, go talk to a soldier. They'll help you. I mean, that's just a crazy thing. So again, when I start to think of this time at Google, I was like, I don't understand why these otherwise intelligent people are saying and acting in such a ridiculous way. Again, feeding this idea of corporatism. And I should say in the first vignette, if people had tried to lead by email, that would have been shot down very quickly. Definitely say happy birthday in person. Vignette number 3, which is this idea of leadership through slide design, definitely not unique to Google, I'm sure. But I remember spending a lot of time coming up with really good content and trying to get some good data and having a thoughtful bullet points, because I for some reason, had to present this information through a slide, which I didn't even really understand, but I went along with it. And then I'd present these managers, they wouldn't actually say anything about the content. They'd be like, the yellow border of that picture is way too bright, and the width of that arrow is way too wide. Who are you that you would choose an arrow that wide to link these images? And I was sitting there like, I don't know what's going, like, am I off in this world? Like, am I the one who's not understanding the way the world works? And again, in the Army, when you're a junior officer and you're out in the field, you don't bullet point your way through things. You're the one with the intelligence, you're the one with the information, you're the one who has to make decisions. You can request resources, you can ask for help, but there's no, the decisions to do things aren't relegated to the width of a slide or the color of your border, or who knows. I have a whole nother theory about, I think just people have too much time and so they need to find things to nitpick, but that's another big difference. Okay, I will let everybody read this great little cartoon real quick. Do I need to read it out, or can everybody see it? So again, this isn't just a Google thing, but again, I'm coming in to the corporate world, and I don't understand how a department manager can say, we're going to have an amazing team, we're going to do things together as a team, we have to be the best team. But by the way, at the end of every quarter, I'm going to choose which one of you I like the best to get either a better compensation or promotion. So I was very guilty of this. You kind of hope that someone you're working with messes up so that you can get ranked higher. And I just found this very strange, and everybody I've talked to feels this way. It's you want to work as a team, but you're incentivized to not work as a team in this strange way. And I never understood how this became a thing. So when I was a junior officer, the Army got rid of this system. We had to do this thing called try to win wars, as opposed to which, that didn't go so well either. But we were focused on the team, right? Because in the Army, you're built around teams. If you don't focus on the team, it's not just bad, it's dangerous, right? You can imagine why that is. So, very different sort of system. I've since heard the Army reinstituted this for junior officers, which is very unfortunate, but I'm sure they paid a big consulting firm a lot of money to tell them why, and I don't have that information. Okay, so again, I go to Google. I'm starting to think maybe there is something wrong with me. Like maybe it's not that. Google's Google Alphabet. It's very successful enterprise. Everybody seems to be acting in this way. That doesn't make any sense to me. So am I at fault? And there are 3 excellent books that really helped me. This is not the order I read them, but this is the order I think it makes sense. So for those of you who haven't read Sapiens, he's basically reminding us that if it's not in nature or biology, it's a figment of our imagination or our collective imagination. So, money being the biggest. Money doesn't actually exist. We only give it value because intersubjectively we say it has value. And again, stack rankings they don't exist. There's no plant that disseminates pollen and ranks us of who the pollen chooses to go into. So that was really nice to know. Like, okay, there are things we can change because they don't actually exist. Systems can change because they don't actually exist. And then, of course, the Ethereum white paper, which is saying, you know what, even the way we structure our interactions and how we think about value and intermediaries, that can all go away. We can bring back this novel idea that people who create value should capture that value, not the rent-seeking intermediaries. Again, amazing. So we don't need these command and control type systems where we're told what to do, we spin our wheels, but unless the director tells us to work on it, it doesn't get done. And third piece, which is probably the least well known to most people in the group, is a book called Reinventing Organizations. And what the author, Frederick Laloux, did was he found businesses today, without the blockchain, running in a non-hierarchical manner, running in this idea of self-managed teams. He color codes it. So he calls this next evolution of business teal. And right now, a lot of tech companies are green. And green's more like it's still, you learn that companies try to develop you, but it's still command and control based. Where with teal, it's all about the team. So between these 3 books, and of course, seeing how consensus organizes and operates, it's like, okay, these things can happen. We can create new realities of how we work. We can use technology to facilitate that. And in fact, many companies around the world operate this way already, and they operate well. So it's not something we're going to cross our fingers and hope it works. So if I were to break down the problems we're trying to solve with Sobol, and I hope most people in the room, I don't hope, but I'm sure you can relate to the idea that we want to get rid of micromanagement or leadership through PowerPoint. And we want to get rid of these real or imagined power structures. And what I think is very interesting is how we're able to conjure power structures that don't actually exist, but we think they do. And then they spread. And so we think we need to cozy up to one person more than another, even though if it's not, even if it's to the detriment of the way the business operates. Third are feedback fallacies. And the more I look into feedback, the more it doesn't make any sense, because most feedback in corporations is actually like, here's how I think you should be more like me, because in my experiences, I've been pretty successful. So maybe, or I somehow got to this role, so maybe you should do more of what I did, which again doesn't make much sense. And I've learned in previous jobs being a manager, when someone says, what should I do better? I think the best response is, what do you think you should do better? Or what areas do you want to improve upon? And the answers are usually aligned, and people have this amazing ability to understand themselves better than you as an outsider do. Very sarcastic when I said that. There's this idea that accountability is hard. It's difficult when teams are growing and they're just co-located and moving fast. How do you keep that accountability going? Right? Time zones are an issue. Things get lost in Slack. I've gotten in a Slack argument before. I'm not proud about it. Emotions were high. It happened. But how can we prevent that? How can we prevent that stuff from happening? You wake up, someone's telling you you're bad, and you're like, what? Okay, anyway. And then this idea of as you get bigger, you have to lose the startup mindset. You have to lose the move fast and break things, launch and innovate, which I just call meaningful, purposeful work. When you enjoy what you're doing, when you're working on stuff that's impactful and you're not being weighed down by bureaucracy or processes that take time away from what you want to be doing. So those are the problems we've been thinking about. And when we think about the solution, and not that we created it, when we think about how humans work in tribes from Sapiens, what it means to remove intermediaries from the Ethereal white paper, how businesses are already being successful from reinventing organizations, we realize it all comes down to the team. The team is the center of everything. And if a team doesn't have a purpose, then it shouldn't exist. So this is the Sobol interface. So again, it looks different than most org charts because we're not focused on someone has this power. This VP can decide things and hire and fire at his or her will, because again, this idea of vice president isn't a real thing. It's something that we've collectively decided is something that we should respect, even if the vice president makes horrible decisions. And we see this all the time in business, where someone has a title, again, imaginary construct from Homo sapien, that shouldn't necessarily have that power. What we then do is we take these teams, and instead of saying you're a user in the team, we say teams have roles. Because in most organizations I've seen or been in, you do many things across the organization. You might come in with a title or an initial responsibility, but when it comes down to it, you have different roles across an organization. And roles are things that you're doing. Role isn't, I'm a director, because again, there's zero shared world context with what that means, even though it might be something that exists in many different geographies. And then we break that down even further. Within each role, you have accountability. So there's goals you're responsible for that are transparently shared, not just across teams, but across an organization. And finally, what I think is the most important thing is the concept of agreements. So when we think about how do I work with another team or my own team members if we're co-located and we want to get rid of these intermediary type structures, we put in agreements. And from firsthand experience of the Sobol team, working with different entities, usually in consensus, and with hearing feedback from other companies or circles, when teams take the time to create an agreement, to review it, to talk about what the responsibilities are to each other, how do the dispute resolution mechanics, timelines, and that's all set out. And yes, it takes time. It takes a little more time than just sending an email or agreeing to something on Zoom. But when you do it and all parties sign and they attach goals and responsibilities to those agreements, it improves things so significantly. There's a team we work with, and we've been very thoughtful, both teams, about this process, and it has been just this exceptional working experience. And there's another team where everything, we can't get them to come to an agreement, so everything's done via email, via Zoom, and of course, people like, I didn't agree to that, or you didn't hear what I said, or no, that's not the right timeline, and it's night and day. It is amazing how, if you follow the process of creating these agreements, and remember, inter-team agreements exist too. So as a Sobol team, we say, these are our team values. This is how we request more resources. This is how we hire. This is how we fire. This is how we work together. And it's not one person. It's not someone with an imaginary title saying it. It's that we've collectively agreed to it, and we all sign it. We talk about it, and we work together in that way. And it is just night and day in terms of, it's like agreements are the fabric of the future of decentralized distributed work. And when I think back to my time in the Army, it was team focused. And again, if we didn't focus on the team or working together to the mission, it was just downright dangerous. So in my mind, Sobol is just more of what the US Army was than what Google was, where it was more about the individual and the individual getting ahead, even if that was to the detriment of the team. So that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, happy to address them. That's my email if you have any more questions. Sobol.io is where we're at. But we love talking about this stuff. We love this idea of the concept of the future of work, and we find, I think as a team, that we've never enjoyed what we're doing so much in our lives because we can work in a way that assists with our humanity, and we know exactly how to work together with each other well. Thank you.